The year is 1765, and a quiet but growing rebellion stirs in the hearts of the American colonies. What began as discontent with taxes has evolved into something far more dangerous, a thirst for freedom. But how did ordinary farmers, tradesmen, and scholars go from peaceful protest to armed revolution? How did a group of colonies, spread across thousands of miles, challenge the most powerful empire on earth? And more importantly, how did they win? This is the story of the American Revolution, a fight for liberty that not only created a new nation, but sparked a movement that would echo throughout history. Today, we journey back in time to unravel the untold stories, the key battles, and the daring visionaries who made it all possible. Chapter 1: Seeds of Discontent. In the beginning, the colonies were loyal subjects of King George III. The settlers enjoyed the protection of the British Empire, while Britain benefited from the natural wealth of the New World. It was a relationship built on trade and trust. But after the costly French and Indian War, things began to change. In 1765, the British Parliament, under pressure to pay war debts, imposed the Stamp Act, a tax on all printed materials, from newspapers to legal documents. For the colonists, this was an unprecedented attack on their rights. You see, it wasn't the money that angered them, but the principle. No taxation without representation, they cried, arguing that they shouldn't be taxed by a government in which they had no voice. It wasn't long before the colonies began to organize, forming secret groups like the Sons of Liberty. These early revolutionaries began staging protests, burning effigies of British officials, and rallying their neighbors against the crown. Among them was Samuel Adams, a master of propaganda, whose passion for independence would ignite the hearts of many. As tensions rose, the British government doubled down, passing more laws like the Townshend Acts and sending troops to enforce them. Boston, a city of fierce resistance, was soon under military occupation, and the stage was set for a deadly clash. Chapter 2: The Boston Massacre. March 5, 1770. Boston is a city on edge. The presence of British troops in their streets is seen as an insult, a reminder that their liberties are being trampled. Tensions had been building for months, and on this night, it would all come to a head. What started as a protest turned into a bloodbath. British soldiers, provoked by an angry mob, opened fire, killing 5 colonists. Among them was Crispus Attucks, a former slave and the first casualty of the Revolution. This event, later called the Boston Massacre, was a turning point. It galvanized the colonies, uniting them against British oppression. The blood spilled in Boston was more than just a tragedy. It was a catalyst. From that moment forward, resistance to British rule would no longer be passive. With each new act of defiance, the colonies edged closer to revolution. Chapter 3: The Boston Tea Party. 3 years after the Boston Massacre, the flames of rebellion were fanned once again. In 1773, Parliament passed the Tea Act, giving the British East India Company a monopoly on tea sales in America. It wasn't the price of tea that enraged the colonists, it was the principle. To them, this was another example of British overreach. On a cold December night, a group of patriots, disguised as Mohawk Indians, boarded 3 British ships and dumped 342 chests of tea into the icy waters of Boston Harbor. It was a bold act of defiance that would send shockwaves across the Atlantic. For King George III and the British Parliament, this was the last straw. They responded with the Intolerable Acts, laws designed to punish Massachusetts and make an example of Boston. But instead of quelling the rebellion, these harsh measures only united the colonies further. Chapter 4: Continental Congress. By 1774, it was clear that something had to change. Representatives from 12 of the 13 colonies gathered in Philadelphia for the First Continental Congress. Their mission: to coordinate resistance against British rule. It was the first time the colonies had come together in such a unified way. The Congress was filled with fiery debates and passionate speeches. Some, like John Adams, called for outright independence. Others, like John Dickinson, urged caution. But one thing was clear: the colonies could not return to the way things were. They began to prepare for war, organizing militias and stockpiling weapons. Then, on April 19, 1775, the first shots of the American Revolution were fired at Lexington and Concord. British soldiers, under orders to seize colonial arms, were met by local militias. Though outnumbered, the patriots stood their ground. The shot heard round the world echoed through history, marking the official start of the Revolutionary War. Chapter 5: The Fight for Independence. With the revolution now in full swing, the Continental Congress appointed George Washington as the commander-in-chief of the Continental Army. Washington, a seasoned soldier from Virginia, was tasked with leading an army of farmers, merchants, and tradesmen against the most powerful military force in the world. The early years of the war were brutal. The Continental Army faced devastating losses, and their lack of supplies, training, and manpower made victory seem impossible. The winter at Valley Forge in 1777 was especially harsh, with soldiers enduring freezing temperatures, hunger, and disease. Yet, under Washington's leadership, the army endured. They were fighting for something greater than themselves. They were fighting for freedom. Despite early setbacks, the tide began to turn. Washington's daring surprise attack at Trenton boosted morale, and the victory at Saratoga in 1777 convinced France to join the war on the side of the colonies. This was a game-changer. With French military and financial support, the Americans now had a fighting chance. In 1781, the final blow was dealt at Yorktown. Washington, with the help of French forces, trapped British General Cornwallis and his army, forcing them to surrender. It was the beginning of the end for British control in America. Chapter 6: The Declaration of Independence. While the war raged on, the colonies were already thinking about their future. On July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, drafted largely by Thomas Jefferson. This bold document didn't just declare independence, it laid out the fundamental principles of a new nation: liberty, equality, and self-governance. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. These words, and the ideals they represented, will become the foundation of the United States of America and inspire freedom movements around the globe. For the colonists, this was not just a statement of intent, it was a declaration of war. And though the road ahead was fraught with challenges, the dream of independence now burned brighter than ever. Chapter 7: The Aftermath. The war officially ended with the signing of the Treaty of Paris in 1783, where Britain recognized the independence of the United States. But while the revolution had been won on the battlefield, the real challenge was only just beginning. How would these 13 colonies unite into a single nation? The first attempt at governance, the Articles of Confederation, was weak and ineffective. It wasn't until the drafting of the U.S. Constitution in 1787 that a new framework for government was established. The Constitution created a republic, with checks and balances to ensure that no single branch of government would hold too much power. In 1789, George Washington became the first president of the United States, marking the beginning of a new era. The revolution had not only created a new country, but it also set the stage for the spread of democratic ideals around the world. Chapter 8: The Legacy of the Revolution. The American Revolution was more than just a fight for independence. It was the birth of a new idea, that government should be by the people, for the people. It sparked a wave of revolutions around the world, from France to Latin America, and its legacy lives on today in the values of liberty and democracy. And that's the story of the American Revolution. But remember, revolutions don't just belong to history. They belong to all of us. The question is, what would you fight for? If you enjoy this video, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and click the bell icon to stay updated on more stories that shaped our world. Share your thoughts in the comments below. What do you think is the most significant legacy of the American Revolution? See you next time.